rely on to succeed. For working families to successfully stay in our city, the final budget must support housing, early childhood education, support for our schools and students, CUNY, mental health and community safety programs, cultural institutions, libraries, parks, and senior services. These are not just council priorities, they are the priorities of New Yorkers. These are programs that people throughout this city rely on to make our city work. Working and middle-class families across this city, our municipal workers and union households in all 5 boroughs cannot afford these resources being lost permanently because it impacts the stability of our neighborhoods and city. The next few days will be critical for our city and the communities we represent, and we really do have a choice. The council is clear that we must choose the responsible, smart approach that invests in our city's success and lays the foundation for our future. For the health, safety, and well-being of our city, the choice is very clear. Now let's dive into our stated agenda. First, we'll vote on the following finance items. A preconsidered resolution sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan, amending a 30-year Article 11 tax exemption covering 12 rent-stabilized buildings in Councilmember Hudson's, Aviles, and Hanif's districts. The amendment will extend the period of exemptions from 30 years to 40 years. A preconsidered resolution sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan authorizing a 40-year Article 11 tax exemption for the preservation of 4 rent-stabilized buildings in Councilmember Ung's district. A preconsidered resolution sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan authorizing a 40-year Article 11 tax exemption for the preservation of 4 rent-stabilized buildings in Councilmember Stevens' district, and a preconsidered resolution sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan amending a 40-year Article 11 tax exemption covering 20 rent-stabilized buildings and 3 vacant lots in Councilmember Felice and Stevens' districts. The amendment will address the phasing out of existing J51 benefits and include an additional vacant lot into the existing project area. Next, we'll vote on the following land use items. The Landmarks Preservation Commission's designation of the New York Public Library's Tremont branch in Councilmember Felice's district. This building was designed in the classical revival style by the prominent architectural firm of Carrere and Hastings and opened in 1905. In 1967, the Tremont branch was one of 8 New York Public Library branches to participate in the South Bronx Project, which brought in bilingual staff, Spanish language books, and programs for the people living in the South Bronx and continues to be a staple in the community. 104 through 108 West 139th Street and ANCP cluster, an HPD application for a UDAP approval, disposition of a city-owned property, and an Article 11 tax exemption to facilitate the renovation and preservation of 5 city-owned buildings, which approximately 73 affordable cooperative homeownership units in Councilmember Salam's district. Red Hook Coastal Resiliency, an application for city map changes and property easement acquisitions by several city agencies, including DOT and DDC, to facilitate the construction of a flood protection system comprised of flood walls, deployable flood barriers, raised streets, and other supporting infrastructure. This project will reduce the risk of coastal storm flooding along the waterfront in Red Hook in Councilmember Aviles and Hanif's districts. Next, we'll vote on the following appointments. Resolution 454, sponsored by Councilmember Keith Powers, would approve the appointment of Helen Skipper as a member of the New York City Board of Corrections. Resolution 555, sponsored by Councilmember Keith Powers, would designate Tricia Tate for appointment by the mayor as a director of the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. Resolution 456, sponsored by Councilmember Keith Powers, would designate Dr. Vincent Calamia for appointment by the mayor as a director of the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. Resolution 457, sponsored by Councilmember Keith Powers, would approve the reappointment of Michael McSweeney as City Clerk and Clerk of the Council to serve the remainder of a 6-year term that expires on May 12, 2030. A preconsidered resolution to approve the appointment of Raju Mann as a Commissioner of the City Planning Commission. Today, we'll also vote on the following pieces of legislation. Resolution 447, sponsored by myself, Majority Whip Sylvina Brooks Powers, and Councilmember Natasha Williams, would designate the first Sunday in June annually as Flake Legacy Day in the city of New York to recognize the spiritual, educational, civic, and economic contributions of the Reverend Drs. Floyd and Elaine Flake in service to the Greater Allen AME Cathedral of New York and to the Southeast Queens community. Introduction 951A, sponsored by Councilmember Lincoln Ressler, would amend the charter to modify the Comptroller's auditing duty. This bill would allow the Comptroller to treat all community boards as a single combined agency and all public administration's offices as a single combined agency for each auditing cycle, reducing administrative burden. The Comptroller would have to send a copy of the draft audit or audit report to each office or board that is covered by the audit and would have to provide in writing a reasonable deadline for its review and response. I invite Councilmember Ressler to the podium to discuss his legislation.
Thank you so much, Speaker Adams. I really appreciate it. Currently, the Comptroller's Office is required to conduct an individual audit of every single individual community board every 4 years. And so it ends up with the Comptroller's Office looking at kind of inane daily things of each community board rather than examining the systemic issues across community boards like hiring practices or access to community space for meetings or other issues or technology utilization that would better allow the controller to give systemic kind of recommendations for how we can improve community board operations. Same is true for public administrators. And so we hope with this legislation will allow for greater efficiency in the Comptroller's Office to conduct smart audits across community boards that can give better, more impactful recommendations and allow the auditing capacity of the Comptroller's Office to go to more pressing investigations into mismanagement of NYCHA or Department of Education or other issues that require greater oversight. So we're really excited to move forward on 951A in partnership with the Comptroller's Office and really want to thank the Speaker for her support and all my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Introduction 642, sponsored by Councilmember Kevin Riley, would officially rename Williamsbridge Square in the Bronx to Marcus Garvey Square. I invite Councilmember Riley to discuss his bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm proud to join Speaker Adams and my colleagues today, amplifying vital legislation to our city and especially my community. And in this month, we continue to celebrate Caribbean heritage, which enriches the rich cultural fabric and social strength of our communities. Today, I want to highlight Intro 642, my bill to formally rename Williamsbridge Square in my district to Marcus Garvey Square. This effort strengthens the passionate advocacy and partnership of community leaders and organizations working tirelessly to empower our communities with education, health resources, and social action. In the Northeast Bronx, much like all of our diverse communities citywide, cultural traditions come together, creating a neighborhood rich in pride and resiliency. I am proud to represent District 12 community born and raised with my Jamaican heritage. Marcus Garvey, a monumental political activist in history, once said, "A people without the knowledge of their past, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." This renaming honors Marcus Garvey's legacy, but more importantly, connects our community's history with its present and future. Marcus Garvey's legacy lives on through organizations like the Jamaican Progressive League and Ms. Sadie Campbell, who inspired this bill and has been trying to pass this since 2005 when I was in high school, is dedicated to enriching the lives of community members and young people. This street renaming and co-naming bill being passed today will revitalize our city's public spaces by ensuring they reflect and celebrate the diverse cultural contribution of all New Yorkers. As we remember Marcus Garvey's impact and honor the diversity that makes our great city, I am grateful for my colleagues and advocates who already supported Intro 642 as we work in unity to pass this bill here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And preconsidered introduction sponsored by Councilmember Shekhar Krishnan would co-name 100 thoroughfares and public spaces based on requests of council members whose districts include the location. And introduction 904A, sponsored by Councilmember Pierina Sanchez, would require the Department of Buildings to create a proactive inspection program to identify hazardous buildings using predictive analytics, weighing factors including but not limited to building data, violation history, compliance filings, and disciplinary history of registered design professionals. Owners of certain buildings would be required to submit corrective action plans to get their buildings into good repair. And I now invite Councilmember Sanchez to the podium to discuss her legislation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On December 20th, 2023, What started off as a quiet day saw the lives of over 170 people upended as the corner of 1915 Billingsley Terrace collapsed in broad daylight. Children were walking home from school, and neighbors had stopped into the bodega to get their soda or chips, and they all had to run for it. The collapse followed years of neglect, hundreds of violations at this property. The Billingsley Terrace Structural Integrity Bill, Intro 904, was born of this question. What more could the city agencies have done to prevent this tragedy? With glaring warning signs at the property, tenants and New Yorkers alike were left asking, what did New York City do with the information that we did have? Yet today, Department of Buildings operates on a reactive basis, answering 311 complaints or emergency situations, like a building collapse. With New York City home to over 1 million buildings, nearly 75% of which were built prior to 1960, we cannot rely on reactive approaches to keep New Yorkers safe in their homes and in their places of work. In a novel approach, Intro 904 will require the city to identify and act on issues before they become major problems. By moving from a strictly reactive approach to a proactive approach that uses predictive analytics, we can do better by New Yorkers. Intro 904 will require DOB to weigh factors that include the age of the structure, maintenance, structural issues, and importantly, I want to highlight what the speaker mentioned, the disciplinary history of registered design professionals and contractors and licensees doing work at a property. Let's recall that at 1915 Billingsley, design professionals misclassified a load-bearing column, and workers pulled bricks out, causing this partial collapse. So thank you so much, Madam Speaker, because 6 months to turn around something of this size does not happen without your leadership and your support. Thank you. And I also want to thank someone who I'm going to talk a lot about today, Kadeem Robinson, who's my Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Communications. It's their last day, who really shepherded this piece of legislation with the Legal Aid Society, our committee counsels, Austin Maloney and Taylor Zaloni. And I got to give it to him. Department of Buildings Commissioner Jimmy Otto really wanted to make sure that we got this right, and there was a lot of collaboration from his team. But most importantly, of course, to the tenants of 1915 Billingsley, we'll continue to work with you. There's still families who are not back in their homes because we have a housing crisis, and if your apartment collapses, you can't find one that's going to be that affordable and is going to fit your family. And so we have to avoid these kind of situations. Thank you for allowing my office and my team to work with you, but thank you also for caring about the bigger picture, caring about New York City, and working with us to pass legislation like this today. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you. And that concludes our stated agenda. With that, we will take on-topic questions first.
Thank you. Speaker, you brought up the budget negotiations.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
You did bring it up at the top. You were talking about remaining committed to reversing.
Oh, let's talk about the bills first. Then we'll come back to that. Promise. Mm-hmm.
Any on topic on the agenda?
Okay, Chris. Come on, Chris.
All right.
Get in there.
On to that then. So, about
Yes.
deadline's about 10 days away. You mentioned at the top of the press conference, still a lot of unresolved issues, cuts that the council is still, as you said, committed to reversing. Is there a possibility that the budget might be late this year, you think? If that happens, what does the process kind of look like when a budget is late? And if you can also comment a little bit on how this compares to last year's negotiations. Are you way further behind than you were, for instance, last year? And then I have one more question on something else.
Okay. All right. The first part of your question, our goal is always to pass a budget that is on time. That is our goal. We are striving to do just that. In comparison to last year, variables are a little bit different, and the negotiations are different. Conversations around funding that the council believes that is there. The administration does not necessarily see things along those lines. We happen to be dealing right now, which we did not want to be in a place of, and I continue to say, we're continuing to restore items that were cut that the council believes should have never been cut in the first place. So we are becoming the council of restoration instead of the council of building, and giving funding where we believe that we can give funding. So that is where we are right now.
Something completely unrelated. It was reported recently that a resolution is going to be introduced calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Do you have any update on the timeline of introduction of such a resolution, and also just in general what the resolution will actually say? You can shed some light on what the details are.
Well, thank you for the question. I'll just say this. I think that assertions that it was postponed, aren't true because nothing was scheduled or even introduced. So we can just start there. Our body has continued to have conversations as a collective for a long time, and individually about it, and we've made space for deliberations to find a shared position about respect for our collective humanity, and ending violence that harms everyone. So at this time, conversations remain ongoing about how this body could address the violence on October 7th and everything that followed that day. So that's where we are right now.
Anita from BOST. Is the mayor's team refusing to budge on? I know that you mentioned a number of things: housing, early childhood, community mental health, libraries, parks, senior services. Can you talk to specifics about what they're not budging on? And is it a fight over revenue with the mayor's team, saying an amount much lower than council?
Thank you for the question. Well, without getting into specifics about the negotiations, we're really days away from really wanting to reach this budget. We've been clear about what priorities are for this council and New Yorkers to ensure funding, and you mentioned a few of them just now. We are looking at early childhood education and education programs that support our students. We're looking at affordable housing, mental health care and community safety programs to reduce recidivism and improve safety, which of course that's our justice-involved supportive housing, cultural institutions, libraries, parks, older adult services. Those are the priorities of the council, and those are the things that we are looking to advance.
I suppose, is the mayor not budging on those specifics?
Well, I'm not saying not budging. We're still, again, negotiating all aspects of all of those things that I just mentioned.
Jeff?
I'm going to also ask for specifics. Just about early childhood, especially. There was a rally in the Rotunda today, and Councilmember Brannon was saying that early childhood is the #1 priority for the council. What specific restorations are you hoping for there? I mean, is it about more operating funds? Is it about more outreach to neighborhoods? Or what's the focus?
Again, without getting into the specifics of the negotiations, I'm going to lead you right back to your question because you just mentioned two of the specifics. You just named some.
Yeah,
Dan?
Dan.
Just on what you mentioned, saying negotiations are different this time around, that about the funding that the council believes is there, and yet the administration does not see things along those lines. What do you mean by that? That the tax receipts, council thinks are more than what the city does, and the city doesn't want to agree to a budget it can't deliver on with the money? Is that what you were referring to?
I'll back up a little bit and say that in speaking about restoration and the cuts that came about some months ago, the council does not believe that those cuts were ever necessary. We still believe that there is money there. We saw in excess of $1 billion that we believe need to work in behalf of not just restoring, but building funding for everything that we just mentioned.
Sorry if I'm not caught up, but where does that billion come from? General tax receipts? Or
Yes,
You
yes.
might ask a question about for a colleague of mine doing Comptroller Lander had an audit of the ShotSpotter contract, and to me it was a mixed bag. Confirmed shootings were only up to 20% of the ShotSpotter alerts. On the flip side, it met all of its performance performance targets in 2022 in every zone but Manhattan. Response times cut in half, and 27% in 1 month of confirmed shootings had no 911 calls attached to them, meaning they were finding more shootings than 911 would have. Taken as a whole, I don't know if you could say if you read it, but in general, do you think the council should take a look at perhaps ending the contract with ShotSpotter, changing it? What's your thoughts?
That's something that I'm not aware of. Thank you for bringing it up. We will take a look at it. I'm unaware of the report, the information, so I'm hearing it from you.
How
the
about
first time.
in general about ShotSpotter? I know it's been a contract that's been out, so forget the report. If you haven't read it, I understand. In general, have you been keeping tabs on it?
I have not.
In your community? I don't know.
ShotSpotter's been around in my community for a very, very long time. So I think that it's been an important tool that is used. Again, I will have to research what it is that you're asking. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Wait, just real quick.
Oh,
I just
sorry.
wanted to circle back on what Chris asked about if the budget were to be late, what is the process there?
Well, without getting into process right now, what I will answer, and I think this will probably be the last answer on the budget for today. There have been a lot of comparisons, and hopefully getting the plane to land. You all know I'm a former flight attendant. So from a council perspective, I will say this. We have banked left. We're in a holding pattern. We're circling the airport. And if possible, there will be a diversion. Thank you.